Okay, good afternoon, everybody. This is Vivek Joshi, host of Aftermarket Champions podcast. Today, I have a guest who is very interesting to me. His name is Scott Frew. He's a founder and CEO of a company called iAsset based out of Australia. And the reason I find Scott and this company interesting is because, like me and many of my colleagues, he's been a practitioner doing this in the field before he started a software company. And more importantly, the software company he started attacks a different part of the problem and a different part of the industry, and namely the technology business. And I thought, as I've got to know Scott over the past many months, I thought it'd be a fascinating guest to get on the podcast and learn a little bit more about his business, his story. And so I invited him and thankfully accepted the invite to come on board. So welcome with that, Scott. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Vivek.
So Scott, I know I shouldn't start this way, but did you watch the match on Sunday?
No, I didn't. I mean, I saw the result, which was fantastic for Australia, not so good for India, but no, I wasn't watching the match.
Good. You saved me the embarrassment of trying to get my nose rubbed in terms of what happened that day, but that's good to know anyway. Well, then we can move on to business. So, Scott, I think, again, like I said in introduction, your story to me was actually quite interesting when I got to meet you for the first time many months ago. And maybe for the sake of our listeners, if you don't mind, just giving a little bit of a Scott Frew story and what you did before iAsset, why you started iAsset, that'd be great. Maybe a little bit of that story.
Sure. So back in the late 80s, after being a COBOL programmer for a couple of years, and COBOL's an old language that no one's heard of anymore, I started with some other gentlemen, distributor. And when I say gentlemen, we're all early 20s. And the reason is because distribution in those days, the distributors were selling direct against their own resellers. It was all a bit of a wild west. So we set up a distributor that sold networking equipment, but didn't sell against their own customers. And that was mildly successful. And we sold that to Netcom, which was a modem company in those days when modems were the thing. Then I started LAN Systems, and that was really all around routers were brand spanking new. ISDN was just being released. And the reseller community needed support for that sort of technology. So I built LAN Systems up to be the largest Cisco distributor in region over 10 years, and then sold that to Westcon. So Westcon down here is my old company. And then I kind of semi-retired for 5 years. I moved to Europe. I sat on some boards. I realized that I'm too much of a control freak to be a non-executive director. So I came back and started Distribution Central. And Distribution Central, I took from nothing to $750 million in 11 years. And it was all based on the platform I built to make us more efficient. And really that story started with Cisco because in those days, you'd sell a router, but most companies wouldn't sell the SmartNet or the maintenance with it. And I told my sales reps if they came back without maintenance, there'd be a problem. So instead of sort of relying on them to do that, that's where I started building out a platform to force the decision rather than make it optional. And that's where we started. And then, of course, that created a renewals issue. And then we had an install base that we could go and attack, and then end of life. And kind of that's the brief story. But really what the platform was aiming to do is take cost out of particularly channel businesses, but vendors as well, because that's the only way you're going to move the net profit needle further up, rather than, most people are suffering with margin compression, especially in this particular market.
So the entirety of the career has been around the technology business, the hardware business primarily, right? Have you worked with the software side of the business as well prior to starting iAsset?
Yep.
You did?
Yep. So we've had software, cloud, and hardware consumption running on it at Distribution Central. And now we run, all sorts of global organizations for consumption, cloud, subscription licenses, and hardware plus maintenance. But originally, the platform was built to chase the maintenance bit. So all of our platform is based on contracts being the primary item, and then assets just being a sundry underneath. So if it's a contract without an asset, there's no particular issue.
There's nothing there. So if you were to describe what iAsset does, because fundamentally you took that experience from Distribution Central and the platform you started building and said you're going to spin a company out of it. So tell us maybe what iAsset is about, who you sell to, what do you do for them?
Okay, so the strategy is to manage product life cycles and install base, and we've finally found a category because I've spent 15 years trying to educate the market, but now they've decided we're revenue technology or RevTech. So, in broad terms, the strategy is there's four things that every company must achieve, especially in the technology business. We call it LIPS: land, invest, protect, surrender. So, land is, to my point before, making sure all of fries and Coke and apple pies are on the burger when you make the burger sale, whether it's your reps or someone else. Once that's done, send it straight into the ERP system. So, you wipe out all of the sales order entry people because you don't need to enter orders into an ERP anymore. Wait for ERP to come back and say it's been invoiced, then start the install base tracking piece, which means you move to invest mode. If you're a vendor, you're only looking to sell, if it's vendor A, looking for other vendor A products to sell to that install base. Or if you're a distributor or a channel partner, you might have vendor A and you want to sell vendor B products to the vendor A customers. So that invest piece lasts for however long the life cycle of that product or customer lasts. Then you go into protect. And a lot of people talk about renewals. I've always had the opinion renewals is the last thing that you want to do because there's a filter that you should go through which says, do I actually want to renew the customer? Do I want to upgrade them, cross-grade them, change the technology? I don't deal with that company anymore, whatever it is. And then after you've got through that filter, then automate the entire renewal stack. So, high speed, long tail, high frequency, low value renewals. And why would you chase that market? Because it's not worth much. Is because the vendors still want that renewal closed. They still want a relationship with the customer. But if you're a distributor or a VAR or SP and you make maybe 6 points, there's people making less than that. If you get a salesperson ring a customer and say, I'm chasing this antivirus renewal, you've lost money. So automate all of that bottom end. Then maybe the mid-tier goes to an inside sales team or a low-cost jurisdiction. And then your top-end deals go to your direct touch or your channel account managers. And then the last part, which is still one of my bugbears because I'm very environmentally focused. I planted over 120,000 trees at DC. I now run a carbon sequestration beef cattle farm as a side gig. But really, the last bit, surrender. What do you do when the product stops? Now, if it's software, it's irrelevant. But if it's hardware, there's rare earth minerals in there, there's gold in there, there's all sorts of things in there from a recycling point of view, or could it be rehoused at another organisation? So only now have I got one big manufacturer who's engaged in that last part, appropriately last part of the life cycle, because they have ESG requirements themselves, but they've never had a platform that could track from cradle to the grave, and then ultimately where I want to get to is back to the cradle again. And so our target market has been the IT or IoT space. IoT's got some particular challenges given there's a bazillion small sensors out there in the field, and there are now government requirements everywhere to make sure that those are updated, and if they're not getting security updates, to notify the end customer. And there's a little bit out there in medtech because you still need a software load, probably an update in your MRI if you don't want the hackers to break into MRI systems, as an example.
All right.
So that's kind of what it's all about, is making sure you don't miss all of the opportunities coming through your product life cycles.
So you mentioned something in the early part of the conversation that when you were running Distribution Central, you used to warn your reps that don't come back without a maintenance contract, right? Without a support contract. But then you also recognize that some of the support contracts, the selling price or contract prices, and you get 6, 7, 8% on it. There's not a lot of money left to pay your people. You also mentioned something while we were kind of leading up to this conversation about building out the automation, the RevTech automation to kind of just make this happen in the background. How does that align with the vendors, which is Cisco, Juniper, and all the other guys? How does it align with their broader strategy? And how do they, I hate to use this phrase, but how do they let you, quote unquote, have control on that process? Because that's their big issue, right? If I was a vendor, if I was a principal, like one of these companies, they want to be able to retain line of sight to the end user. How does that work with you guys?
So I would argue for most of the manufacturers, they don't have line of sight of anything. They're lost in the fog of war. They might get some point of sale detail fed up through the channel, but the distributors and the resellers don't really care about the vendor's reporting requirements. And if you look at a global channel, Cisco or Juniper or NetApp or whoever it is, they can't see everyone in China. They can't see everyone in Thailand. They can't see everyone in Canada. They can see everyone in domestic US market because they're in the same time zone. They're close.
Mm-hmm.
So we're assuming for the most part they've got to deal and engage with this channel. And the channel wants the money. It's not that they're ignoring it. It's just they've never been enabled to do it. And a lot of people, in particular, companies like Cisco, try and force them into a portal, which, if they're dealing with 30 portals a day or even more in some cases, they're never going to get any work done. So what you actually want to do is have a conversation if we're selling to a channel partner to say, let's get your arms around all of the renewal space, automate everything, and then you push it up to the manufacturer. And the manufacturer then is happy that the reseller is doing the job they're supposed to be doing. So that's why, and in our, fundamentally in the IT space anyway, believe we were the first ecosystem product. And when I say ecosystem, I mean if you drop an ISET platform in the vendor, the distributor, and the reseller, they all integrate. Everyone can see everything, and you remove the fog of war and the doubt or the data points that are misaligned between each of those players.
So when you just said what you just did, which is the vendor, the distributor, and the reseller, they all would have access to the same source of truth. And so theoretically,
they do insofar as everyone wants control of their data, and I'm absolutely across that. So think about rather than a single source of truth or a platform sitting in the middle that everyone's going into, they all have their own data repositories, and their data repositories may have different fields or things that they don't share, but the basics are, customer name, renewal dates, or start and end of contract date, contract information, whatever it is. So everyone's still got their little silo of data, so they've got control of their business. And this is very much, as to my point before, being a control freak. The resellers generally and the distributors, most of them, the ones we aren't running, definitely do not have control of their own data set. They are heavily reliant on an upstream provider making sure that product lifecycle revenue is working, and it's just not good enough because, as I said, vendor can't see everything because they've got this two-tier channel separating them from the end customer as much as they'd like to think they've got control.
But I wonder if that's different from the industrial world that I live in. We don't have the two tiers. We typically have one tier, which is they'll go to reseller, they'll go to distributor, some channel partner, and that's it. But even then, those channel partners, be it a large manufacturer's rep or distributor or integrator, they tend not to provide any visibility back to the vendor, right? I mean, it's almost like, you shall not cross this line and I'm never going to show this information. But it sounds like, at least in the technology market, people are willing to share the end user name, or did I misunderstand it?
No. Point of sale data is an accepted transmission amongst the players inside the network. We had probably that industrial view back 30 or 40 years ago, but now it's an acceptable. Think about it from the terms of maintenance contracts. The manufacturer has to know where they're delivering that software maintenance to. If you revert back to Cisco, they've got 7 global price lists and not all services are available in all countries, so you've got to be able to deal with that. So this is very much a data issue, they're not worried about the manufacturer coming over the top and selling direct. There is a level of trust. And, you see distributors and resellers fall out with their vendors, or the vendors decide that they're going to go direct and then regret their decision 3 years later and, tell everyone how much they love the channel. That happens periodically.
And I wonder if that is because the volume of goods that go through the channel is vastly higher in the technology business than the world I live in. There's only so many large pumps that get sold through the channel versus so many routers going through a channel, or so many servers or whatever it could be, right? I wonder if that's one of the things where the vendor realizes there's no way they can ever keep up with this stuff, or no way they want to deal with the distribution and sales of that stuff, versus somebody selling a $50,000 pump and they're going to sell, maybe 20,000 of them a year. It's a different scale of the game as well, I think, right?
It is in that straight sales motion. But if you think about and again, I'm not an expert in the industrial side, but if you think about someone who might put on some sensors or whatever, or something that requires some level of support on that pump, that changes it from a net new sale of $50,000 pump to potentially an annually recurring revenue of $5,000 or $7,000 per annum. And you want to make sure that money's coming through to the manufacturer and their partner if they have one in that particular case. So yes, there's the sheer scale of IT, but I was at an event actually last week where we picked up an award, and the industry when I started was only maybe 300 people, and there were 5,000 people there, and these are all just channel types. And that's what I'm saying, that every industry is now being touched by some sort of technology, some sort of sensor, and all of the people I speak to that don't have trailing revenue, even in the non-IT space, is how do you work it so you end up with trailing revenue? Because that's the only way you can sustain and build a business, rather than I've sold something, now I have to go and find someone else to sell to, right? It's just not as scalable.
The recurring revenue magic, right? Everybody wants some of it, right? It's a good drug to have. Now, there's something you mentioned in the early part of the conversation also was about the install base.
Yes.
Right. You talked about the framework you have, land, something.
Invest, protect,
right? That requires somebody, aka your VAR or partner, to have complete visibility on what happened to that install base.
Yes.
How does the iAsset platform do that? And who's using it on a day-to-day basis to understand what's happening in the install base?
So first up, from a data collection point of view, we're connected via APIs to every system we can connect to. So if you look at a very small reseller, we're going to be connected to Xero or MYOB or one of these bookkeeping type systems. So we'll trap all of the financial data, and in some cases, in the very small ones, we're the master. So we tell the accounting system what to do, and it does it and tells us it's done. In the bigger ERP systems, they carry a lot more data typically, so we'll get a lot bigger feed through that pipe. But we also connect to license managed systems. So we've got one security manufacturer who we run globally. They put boxes effectively for free, they don't charge for the box, in their customer sites for security. Then they have consumption running on them. So their license management system talks to our system. So that's another source of data. Then you've got storage companies have dial home systems that tell them what are happening to the storage arrays. So we can connect to that, and then it can trigger us to do something with a channel partner. So let's say they know the customer's going to run out of storage in 3 months.
Yeah.
We can have a channel partner out there with another shelf. So we can connect to anything that's logical inside any sort of business, support desk, ServiceNow, and those ITSM systems. We can populate them with initial entitlement records from the sale, and then they'll tell us when something's been changed for the next renewal cycle. So there's a lot of base load data that we connect to, which means you remove the humans out of this process. And it can get a bit scary. A related story that happened only yesterday. I've got a customer, not a very big reseller, but they want to turn off the renewals engine because they can't cope with the flood of opportunities they're getting. And we're like, no, that's not actually the answer. You need to let the platform automate the quotes and let them out the door, but they've got very much want to control every quote, right? So you can go down the rabbit hole of co-termination, which, we can do, but you've got to get the rules from the vendor, and the vendors don't want to give up the rules, and there's all sorts of issues. But, really, you're trying to automate everything. So I don't want a sales rep particularly touching anything that the platform can do, so that they've got a relationship, they're on the phone to the customer, they're engaging at that, what do you need next? Not here's all of the drudgery of putting a quote out for another cycle.
Scott, you started this company, 15 years ago on the iAsset side?
Yep.
You started in Australia.
Yes.
Is bulk of your team in and around Australia, and the market is the APAC region, or where's your market now?
No. So we're about 40 North America, 40% Europe, and 20% APAC. So the reason is, the APAC, really a lot of our bigger customers are manufacturers or global distribution organizations. So they're naturally based out of Europe or North America. Australia, although we've got a lot of customers, they're smaller reseller type customers, because I can't sell the distribution here because the decisions are made in North America and the vendors are all in North America. So most of my team, my development team is still here in Australia, and I keep it Australian, and that's really, we tried offshoring, completely different experience to you, obviously, but I don't have the connections. So we have all of our team developing here in Sydney. Then we've got delivery and sales in North America, Europe, and then we have a team in Manila, which is all our 24-hour support and QA, and they're my people. They're not outsourced. So that's kind of the spread of the business. The only reason I ended up back in Australia, because I was living in the UK, is it was a COVID story, which I won't bore you with, but that's where we are at the moment.
When you started this company, obviously it's a long you're a long way from where you were 15 years ago, where you were building out the business. What is the biggest lesson or biggest observation you made in the technology business? Because like you, I was in technology about 20 plus years ago at another server vendor, as you know. We had a tough time keeping this straight. I mean, in fact, part of the reason I started in Title is that the pain I had as a VP of marketing for services in this business what led me to kind of build a Title, because I wanted to solve that problem. What have you observed in the last 20 years? Because you've been around for as long as that or more in this business.
Well, I've been around nearly 40. I know I look young for 40s, but it's been a long haul.
Yes.
Let me start with what hasn't changed. In the IT space, there are still companies that are manually trying to manage this stuff on Excel spreadsheets, or there's one global distributor that's trying to beat SAP into shape to do it, but it's just never going to work. It surprises me. So let me give you a US IT, and maybe this is a bit cynical for your viewers, but let me show you a US IT startup. So they build a widget, whatever the widget is. They go and employ a team to run Oracle or SAP or NetSuite over the top of it. They go back to building the widget, and they keep building widgets and expect everything to happen at the back. No one actually, even though they're innovative companies, innovates on an operational stack. They think they are, but they're not really. They're running systems that were built in the 80s and 90s, and they're now as bloated as Cisco IOS is. They can no longer be agile, right?
Yeah.
So nothing has changed from that point of view, and we still have startup conversations. There's one large company that comes back to us every 2 years and says, we need to solve this problem. Okay, here's the platform. And then IT comes along and says, no, we can build that. So I think, as you would probably appreciate, SaaS vendors who are classified as shadow IT by the IT guys, we're always competing with IT. And if you have companies that the business runs IT, then we're good. But if you have companies that the IT runs the business, then that's when we end up in a clash.
The biggest competition you probably have is IT, who says, I can build it myself, right?
Yeah.
Hey, what's a couple of spreadsheets? What's a couple of BI tools? What's a couple of alerts and notifications to kind of get this thing going, right?
Or I'm competing with Excel, and
competing with Excel.
I heard a story about Excel the other day.
I've never competed with Excel in my life. Never ever competed with Excel in my life. I only see it every day. I literally, the call right before this, I was talking to one of my customers, and she wanted me to give her what I would call a depositioning document against Power BI. I was like, you got to be kidding me. He's like, nope. I need to make the case why Entitle's not Power BI, right?
Yeah.
I see that every day. I mean, literally every day. That's my life.
Yeah.
So I referred to the fact that when I was at the server and storage maker is really when I kind of thought about Entitle as an idea, in the sense that it was painful for me to get my salespeople enabled, armed, activated, if you may, with these renewals, because back then, yes, we went through VARs, but our salespeople were chasing the VARs down to get things done. Do your principals or do your vendors, salespeople also use a system to go work with the VARs to get them to do what they need to get done? Or how does that process work today in the execution?
So again, if you assume that the automation piece is done, so either the low value stuff's gone out the door, no one's touching that. The next tier up, they might. Let me give you an example. There's a manufacturer that ships the month's worth of quotes out to their channel partner and expects the channel partner to turn that around. Some of them do it well, some of them don't do it so well. But they have channel account managers rather than the direct touch reps.
Right.
So direct touch reps and the vendor are, as the name suggests, they're out there selling the company to the end customer, and every vendor's got them, especially in North America.
Yep.
But no, the at the lower stack, the channel account managers are chasing the resellers for this business. Or what's really crazy and a worst case scenario is where the salespeople, especially in-country salespeople, country managers, don't get paid on renewals, so they don't care anymore.
Don't care.
And then the US has to chase it remotely. It happens today regularly.
So it sounds like in many ways, This is 2023. I was a VP of marketing in 2003, 2004. Really not much has changed to that degree, right? In terms of
Well, it's
some people
it's
not caring about it, right?
yeah, it's your innovation hump, right? So the ones that care deeply about it are the ones who have grappled with consumption and have moved to that recurring revenue cycle. There are still a lot of very old school people, particularly in global distribution, who have not moved at all in that time, which is just crazy. And that's why, to a certain extent, if we can't sell it to one of their distributors, we can sell it to their customers, and their customers take control of that data. And it actually gives the reseller a more powerful position to negotiate with the distributor because they now have the control of the data, not waiting for it to come downhill.
You mentioned something a little while ago, which I want to pick up on. You mentioned that you're trying to automate everything, and I don't think you use this phrase, but you're trying to remove human intervention from many of these processes. At least that's the phrase I'm using.
Yep.
I bring that up because, I obviously, just like you, I talk to my customers and prospects every day. I was in Europe last couple of weeks ago. I mentioned that to you. And in North America and in Europe, there's a massive talent crunch going on where
Yep.
there's older people retiring, the veterans are retiring, and the new people aren't coming into the business. More importantly, when they come into the business, they're not trained enough to kind of figure
Yep.
out what's going on. So I've been thinking about this whole notion of what I would call autonomous aftermarket, which is kind of related to what you were saying, which is, you know what? Just find ways to just let this stuff run in the background.
Yep.
Let it automate itself. Don't get any human intervention in the process. This is from the industrial world, by the way. Are you
Yep.
seeing something similar in the technology markets that you work in as well?
So that's what I've been pushing for almost as long as I've been in IT, either in my own companies or in my customers, in the case of Asset. Yes, you've got the silver wave or whatever they're calling the retirement phase.
Silver tsunami, yep.
Silver tsunami. You've got this lack of trained technical resource, and particularly if you look at cyber is sucking up every intelligent person they can get their hands on at the moment.
Yep.
So that's creating this glut in this scarcity in other markets. So my entire go-to-market is if a human doesn't have to do it, you don't. The principal of the business owner doesn't have to worry about sick leave and holidays and all the other bits and pieces that go on with humans. And the human actually gets to enjoy their work a bit better because they're not sitting there. There will be someone watching this who is sitting down after this video to do another quote in Excel or some other manual system that they have to do every day over and over and over and over again.
Right.
And if I was working for someone and they gave me that job, I'd be out of there 3 minutes later. It's just this repetitive nature. And if you shift that forward, even more forward, you've got AI coming down the pipe. So we've had a machine learning module for our system. If you get 3 years of renewals data in a row, we can start to predict your fail rate more than a quarter ahead. But generative AI changes that again. So we're sitting here thinking, right, well, if dashboards are going to become less relevant and it's going to be a question and answer type thing, how do you do that over install base? So we had a leadership team meeting last week down in Sydney, and it was really all about, what are those next steps? What's the average person inside a vendor, a distributor, and a reseller going to ask about that? Or is the generative AI going to be presented to the end customer so they can query their own install base or whatever's going on above them? So there's all of these different pieces coming which are not human based. So the first thing I would recommend any viewer is make sure your data is rock solid, because if AI makes decisions on data that's not rock solid, you're going to end up with the wrong result. And this happened to me yesterday. I asked generative AI to write a formula for a spreadsheet I was doing some calculations on, which was so complex, I just couldn't be asked trying to get my head around it. Excuse my French. But it put the formula out wrong. I had to go in and modify the formula because although it understood and repeated what I'd asked it to do, the formula was wrong. So my point in your world and my world is if you don't have that install base data absolutely rock solid, and then they're trying to run businesses over it, then you try and run AI over it, it's all going to fall apart.
What you said is actually interesting, but I'm going to ask you a little bit more provocative question. How many or what percentage of your customers that you sell to, be it VARs or distributors or maybe even the vendors, how many of them even ask you about AI right now?
None.
Because it's really sad. The reason I asked you the question, I come from the electromechanical stuff making industry. I would think that the server and storage and networking gear makers would be a bit more sophisticated and a bit more advanced than that, but clearly not. I mean, I had an executive advisory board like a month and change ago, and I asked people. Actually, I did ask people. I asked what's on your horizon, and none of them mentioned AI.
Yep.
Certainly not Gen AI, right?
Yeah.
So it's like, okay, well, it's almost like you're trying to figure out: do you build a faster horse, or do you build a car that people realize, well, I didn't need a faster horse, I needed this car, right?
Yeah. Well, the risk is, as you would know, build it and they will come. There's a lot of risk in that, right? But we're trying to predict what that is in the future. And back to my point about these technology companies, they are very focused on the widgets and not focused on operational efficiency.
Yeah. In our business, I'm not exactly going to take the speculative build risk, because if I were to build a car, they're simply looking for faster horses. So I'm kind of being a bit more pragmatic about what to build and what not to build.
Well, the only problem is I'm one of those entrepreneurs that sure is right. And I mean, I've spent 15 years building a platform I wanted 15 years ago, and it works and under stress. And once we get into a customer, they expand very quickly.
That's right.
But, every next massive step we take, which takes obviously dev resources and time, and, you've got to break a few things. That's always a risk in this particular business.
It is a risk in this particular business. And that actually leads me to the last question or two, which is, what's next for iAsset? Where do you see this business going? What do you think your market's doing, and how do you line up against that?
Well, I think to your point, from a technology pace, where AI is the big thing, and Copilot, and we're a completely Azure backplane. So once Copilot has, and I haven't talked about security of AI, but if anyone's watching this, don't load anything that's proprietary into ChatGPT.
Exactly.
Because it becomes public information. But once Microsoft's got their stack, and I think I saw a news article this morning that the ex-CEO of ChatGPT has gone to
You
Microsoft.
missed the drama this weekend.
Yeah.
It was a soap opera the entire weekend here.
Yeah. Well, now he's working for Microsoft, apparently.
Yes.
So in the technology context, we're charging ahead on the AI piece. There's some other automations which are a bit early to call yet that we're working on. We're upgrading our mapping algorithms at the moment. So, we had heat maps a while ago, and then we had a massive, and again, this, whether you do a software business or you I don't know, but you do a complete rewrite because you realize where the holes are in the future, and that changes a whole lot of things, and then you've got to catch up again. So our mapping algorithms, which will give heat maps to the IT vendors as to where they're doing well or not doing so well in an instant. That's the kind of pre-API level. The pre-AI level. Yeah. Once we get AI going, AI will just tell them where the risks are that are associated with that. So that's from a technology stack. From some of the deployments we're doing at the moment, we've got some interesting ones going out with a big security distributor, and that will change the security marketplace, and putting more and more APIs direct into manufacturers, even if they're not customers of iAsset, to help their channel operate better and get, the notifications, particularly on end of life and end of sale.
Automate everything, right? That's the mantra.
Absolutely.
Excellent. Well, I think this was an interesting conversation, Scott. I think I could keep going on for a long time. There's a lot more questions I wanted to ask, but I think the context of what you said is actually interestingly similar to what we're dealing with in the industrial world. I always thought that the technology world is a bit more advanced. In some ways they are, in some ways they're not. And I'm thinking that there's a lot of commonalities here between what you've been doing and what we've been doing. And I'm sure we're going to keep in touch and exchange more stories and more ideas over time. So I really appreciate you coming on this podcast today and spending some time with us. And good luck for the next 6 weeks of the year for you. And we'll be in touch soon.
You too, Vivek.
Awesome. Thank you, Scott. Have a good day.
Cheers.